So, thank you all for joining us. We wanted to have this webinar or a commentary to talk about what's been going on in this first half of the Republican National Convention. And it has been quite a ride, so I'm sure there will be plenty to discuss. And what we could expect to happen come November and what we can do about it. We want to share some ideas of how we can survive this time, and not just survive, but really hopefully have something great. So I'm going to kick off with our very own Ariel to talk to us about Mike Pompeo's interesting speech last night and what's going on that front.
Well, I want to say that I shouldn't have been shockingly horrified that when Mike Pompeo announced that he would be addressing the RNC from Jerusalem, I shouldn't have been shockingly horrified because this comes in a long succession of despicable actions that the U.S. administration has taken, beginning with the moving of the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and then the recognition of the Golan Heights, and of course, the most recent action, the facilitation of the sham Israel-UAE normalization of relations agreement. So I shouldn't have been shocked by this, but I was, because it not only was an act of another blatant support for Israel's system of apartheid and occupation, but because it also violates the very restrictions that Pompeo himself has placed on State Department staff not to be engaged, not to use our taxpayer dollars for partisan activities. And no Secretary of State previously, even under Republican administrations, has ever given a partisan speech, has ever addressed a party's convention. But Mike Pompeo announced not only that he would be addressing the convention, but that he was doing so while in Israel on a State Department diplomatic trip. And he said, no worry, the speech itself is paid for by the Republican convention. But he is, of course, there as the Secretary of State. But so he did, in fact, address the RNC. He did so with the skyline of Jerusalem behind him, which is a slap in the face to Palestinians and to Muslims around the world who are unable to visit Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam. Now, what Pompeo did, this shameful act of using religion, of using Judaism. I myself am a practicing Jew, and I don't appreciate having my religion used as a political prop by anybody, certainly not a warmonger, like a war criminal like Mike Pompeo. But this had nothing to do with supporting the Jewish people in any way, certainly nothing to do with supporting American Jews, who, by the way, vote close to 80% for Democrats consistently. What this was a call to the evangelicals. This was a call for the evangelical vote, telling them, come and vote for Trump. And for anybody who isn't familiar on what evangelical, what the evangelicals, what their interest would be in Jerusalem and Israel. Well, it's kind of creepy and definitely weird, but the idea is, according to evangelicals, that the Jewish people must return to the land of Israel in order for Armageddon to happen, and they need Armageddon, at which point the Jews will convert or not convert. We usually don't convert. And those who don't convert, the remaining Jews and the Muslims and everybody else who doesn't believe in their evangelical Christianity, will burn up in a ball of fire. So this is the evangelical vote that Pompeo is courting. And it's also, trying to get Trump reelected. And he also did so to help repair Netanyahu's battered image. For close to 2 months now, there have been tens of thousands of protesters in the streets of Jerusalem outside of Netanyahu's residence there, demanding that he resign. Most of these protesters, the main message of these protests is around Netanyahu's corruption campaign. But for the first time in decades, which is a really exciting thing, the protesters against Israeli apartheid are also part of that larger protest. So if you saw Pompeo's speech last night and you weren't sure what that background was, why, what he was doing, what the purpose was of that, this was that purpose. And he should be ashamed of himself. Clearly, this man has no shame. And we should all be disgusted that this took place. And we should be worried about what this means for the basic rules that we have, that such diplomatic roles are not to engage in these types of party politics.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ariel. And what a perfect encapsulation of the Trump administration's foreign policy for the past 4 years. And I echo your opening sentiment that we should not be surprised, but we still are for some reason. So thank you, Ariel, for kicking us off. Next, we are going to go over to Jody, who will introduce us to Kelly and discuss building a local peace economy.
Hi, thanks, Mary. Thanks, Ariel. That was so crisp and right on. So, you know, as we look at the RNC and the DNC, we know that it's a whole system, and it's a system that is oppressive, extractive, and destructive. We call it the war economy, and we need to all be divesting from it. You know, later on, you're going to hear from Carly about how we can divest our communities and our churches. But Kelly and I want to talk to you about how we can be cultivating our local peace economies. Economy in Greek means how we make home. And so, you know, making a home, we're not making a really good home when it's destructive, oppressive, and extractive. We're making a pretty harsh home, as we know, as we've seen with climate change, with COVID. We can't respond because we have not invested in the well-being of all people on the planet and the planet itself. Instead, we've invested or just burned up money on war, militarism, and weapons. But Kelly works to cultivate the peace economy locally. And so I'm gonna let Kelly talk about, like, what does that look like, Kelly? What does it look like to cultivate a peace economy? And welcome, it's so nice to have you with us. I'm gonna also share my screen.
Cool, it's good to, can you all hear me? You can hear me? It's really great to be here. It's really great to be a part of a beautiful movement. Like Jody said to me early on, building an ark. And now is the time that we need the ark. Jody Evans refers to the local peace economy as an ark. It just sounds like, what does she mean? Now I see what she means, because the waters are definitely rising. Today I was out, Oscar Grant, Fruitville BART station in Oakland, California, delivering nutrition in the form of smoothies, green smoothies. I guess we're looking at this group called the High Beams that I'm training. They're a group in training from Planning Justice, Heal Your Body, Energy, Attitude, Mind, and Spirit. And we are now filling in the gaps that have been left wide open by war economy, by feeding people in the streets with green smoothies and yielding nutrition. We do about 1,000 units a week. And we're just invited to do 2 more days, actually. So that looks like, you know, supporting folks who are not getting the vital nutrition that they need to survive and live. And as Ariel was talking about all of these issues, which are, you know, I think kind of like out of people's, like the regular folks that we work with who are trying to nourish, who are just trying to make ends meet, just trying to keep roofs over their heads. These issues about Israel and what's going on all over the world and our runaway government just seems so kind of out there, but they're so germane. And I'm always thinking, like, how do we connect people back to the essentials of being actually a part of, you know, voting and being engaged when they've literally been so completely marginalized. So what we're doing is, and these are all local peace economy projects that have kind of taken root. And so thankful just for that language and for that ability to be able to do that. But it's just going out and talking to people and working in our communities, and like the women who are here that we're looking at, Yenny and her mom, this is her mother, and they come out. It's a beautiful spirit that they have to come out into the local community. This is a Black community, the one that we're looking at now, Castlemont, Deep East Oakland. The other community that we go to is Fruitvale, which is very, very mixed and very diverse. The local peace economy piece is important because the gals from San Francisco, who I saw yesterday, donated about 50 masks. That's a way that, trying to engage and build the bridges for people who have been separated by war economy through racism, through the sense that we're not all one. COVID has been assisting in us all seeing and laying bare what the ravages of our society, quite frankly. And a local peace economy really supports with having a language and also having an opportunity to bridge people. And it's really my work to do that. I'm not quite sure that I would be as successful if I didn't have the knowledge and understanding of war economy and local peace, just because it gives me a language and a confidence to use when I'm relating to communities. This is yesterday, we were in San Francisco. And when I first started working with CODEPINK, I really wasn't, really clear around, the war piece of it, even though the organization that I do a lot of work with is an anti-war organization because we're growing food locally. That's a local peace economy project, planning justice. And trying to make sure that we're growing food locally, not using so much petrol, shipping food in, not using all the plastic that's created from petrol. So yesterday I had a great time with the ladies holding up this banner, once again with confidence, because I know the revolution comes to demilitarizing and making America love again. All these things, these flags and posters and things were made by hand. That's another t-shirt that I got actually from another organization that I work with. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And that's such a local peace economy vibe, like it's us. I saw the other interview with another activist and Jody talking about leadership. And I think that the situation with COVID and this upcoming election really is making us understand that we've got to get busy in our communities, talking to people, getting people engaged. I mean, quite literally, if I look at going out and asking brothers on the street corner to vote, they laugh at me. Even if they can vote, they will laugh at me because they've been so ignored and so absolutely depleted by these systems. So when I think about the challenge of what's coming up for us in, November, it's like, how can I form, the energy and also the connection and the context to say to these guys, please go out because it's going to get worse. Things have gotten worse in our communities, absolutely, since Trump's been in office. I just don't know. I'm not confident that people are feeling the engagement enough to participate in the way that they need to. But I'm really excited that that local peace economy is involved in the lives of people on the ground here in Oakland. I go on forever. What did you have questions?
Well, I mean, so Kelly, I think that's an important thing to talk about. When we look out at the choices, I think for all of us, it's hard because there isn't the choice for the world that we want. And it's like there's the greater of two evil is also a little depleting to spirit, soul, and heart. Right. And I think what's great about cultivating a local peace economy is that come November 3rd, we're going to have to vote, and that's going to take whatever form it does. But on the way there, not to be used by the machine, but be invested in the future. And the one thing I think we can all agree with is that it's failed. The system has failed. It has failed everyone, except for the very rich and the elite who own it. Right. And here we are throughout history. We thought we were in a modern world, but we're like back in the dark times where it's all owned by a few people, and everybody else is working their ass off and doesn't have the capacity to really live life. Right. So what we want is to be able to free people from the war economy and find out how do we build the systems outside of this? Because even every economist, the Wall Street Journal, all the main economic journals say the thing has failed. Capitalism has failed. The system has failed. Imperialism has failed. Wars have failed. It has all failed. But the problem is that we're not coming up with, creative solutions. And so, yeah, why do people buy into like Bloomberg or Biden? It's like, well, they know how to make the thing work. But the thing they know how to make work is the thing that, marginalizes, oppresses, and extracts. So it's not the thing that we want to work. We want a new world to work. And, what we watched last night at the RNC was, really Trump getting up there and people getting up there and saying, the United States will never be socialist, right? But wait a sec. So then basically we're saying that it can only be the war economy. It can't be an economy that works for all, and that's not acceptable. And it's kind of like people saying the post office fight is around democracy. Well, the post office has been around forever, and we still don't have democracy. So it's not about democracy. The post office, more importantly, is about a common good. And those common goods have been privatized and privatized and privatized. And we have a post office that is still a common good. And we can't let the conversation be about it doesn't, it costs too much money, or it doesn't have a return on investment, or somebody could do it better. Nobody can do the post office better. The post office is a common good. The post office is actually functioning. And it was functioning in more ways than one. It was functioning as a common good. It was functioning in a way that everyone could afford it. It was functioning in a way it created good, stable jobs in a community that, really, one of the great heartbreaks of 2008 was that the post office had created so many great jobs that it created a whole middle-class neighborhood in Queens. But you know what? Loan sharks, basically, is the best way to call it, came in from banks and savings and loans, went to all these people who'd been working at the post office and told them they were going to get them a loan on their house, so they would automatically get like a couple $100,000, kind of bonus, like told them stuff, loaned them money in this really horrible way that became what crashed the economy. But it also meant that all those people, mostly people of color, mostly Blacks, had, first of all, to get that house, had to come up with 50% down back in the 80s. Then they finally paid it off and they owned that house. And then it was literally stolen from them. Right. By these loan sharks after, so here we are. That's the war economy. We need a peace economy so we don't get gentrification, so that we can, the community can own what is theirs. Basically communities have been stolen from people over the last 12 years. And now through COVID, billionaires just basically another $1 trillion just got stolen from, poor people and working class people in the United States and moved to make the rich richer. So if that doesn't convince you that we need to be coming together and finding out how do we create another system together? How do we take care of each other? Because floods, fires, COVID, war, this is just the beginning. We need to be learning how to be related to each other, how to be working together with each other. Some of the best responses to COVID happened in places where fires has been, because we know once we've been through one of these disasters, what is essential and how we take care of each other. So just an encouragement of how not to get depressed over an election cycle is to engage locally. Find the Kellys in your community. Find who is working together, bringing together young and old, bringing together those that have with those that need. And building those webs of connection and support, because that's what we need to be doing, and not be getting depressed, but being engaged. And so maybe Kelly, you can tell us how does it feel to be engaged in cultivating a economy?
Right now it's a lifesaver. It's really a lifesaver. Whenever I hear someone say that they think they got sick because they're the fear in their body, or because they feel every time they watch COVID TV, they're like, I'm gonna die, everyone's just sneezing or that kind of thing. So actually to be going out and doing something that's so vital right now, and meeting people, and then also building lists and building, you know, more relationships and having it grow and being invited to other places. And in the process, training folks who, the people that I work with who I'm training were kind of at the nursery, potting plants and grafting and doing really important work to build the food system. But now also like 1 or 2 days out of the week, they're actually on the street interacting with people, dancing, making smoothies, sharing love and joy. And that is really a demonstrator of how much we need each other. The people are so happy to see us, and it's just happy to be out. It saves my mind and it saves my soul. It's really been great for my writing too. So, you know, I have a question though, and the question for you all is, for anyone, is like, do you feel that it all needs to fall apart for people to see, for Americans to see? And if it does, you know, this world built by war economy, are we gonna have the energy to build something beautiful and refreshing and new like the local peace economy?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but you know, I think that's why we want to be building it now, because it builds the muscle. We don't realize how much we're those frogs in the warm water that kind of demuscle us, you know, and then we just get, you know, eaten in the end. So we are kind of all, you know, frogs in the warm water, kind of demotivated, you know, the depression comes in, and it's just like the lack of energy and the boredom because we're not engaged in life. Too many of us aren't like getting our hands dirty and our feet in the ground and reminded that we're connected to a planet and it's rich and teeming with life and energy and vitality, because it's a regenerative process. If we don't touch the earth and feel that regeneration, and we're just inside of buildings all the time and fake lights, and then that's itself, you know, demotivating. So part of what cultivating the peace economy is about is that, you know, as hopefully we wake up faster and faster. I mean, I think after COVID, more people understand what is essential, like how much energy was spent like out there, when really what matters is in here. Oh my God, I have just an amazing quote that I want to read from Wendell Berry. Because tomorrow I'm doing a conversation with Bill McKibben and Wendell Berry's daughter, Mary, and I was looking up a quote that speaks to the peace economy. No matter how much one may love the world as a whole, one can live fully in it only by living responsibly in a small part of it. Where we live and who we live there with define the terms of our relationship to the world and to humanity. We thus come again to the paradox that one can become whole only by the responsible acceptance of one's partiality.
Wow. Yeah.
Deep, right?
It's real.
That is beautiful and so perfect for the local peace economy.
Yeah.
So I think it's being able to recognize, especially as anti-war activists, we have big hearts. We're in this because we have compassion and empathy, and we see the damage of the imperialist government that we live in the country of. We see that and we want to change it. But, you know, we also have to be grounded locally, because in that we understand how things work. We're able to articulate it. But, you know, the levers of change, we have to be able to hold on to them. And when we can hold on to them, we can create change. So, you know, as you'll hear from Carly later, that we have to engage locally. Liz is trying to get in. When we engage locally, we create the bigger mass to create change. But if our hearts are just worried about what's happening in Yemen and trying to create those changes, we're not building that a big enough lever, you know, a big enough tool to actually lever the change. And you know, as we look at Lebanon, one of, you know, Nancy's leaving for Lebanon soon. And, you know, Lebanon was falling apart. When you say, does it take falling apart? Well, Lebanon was falling apart. They were already reaching out to us for how do we grow a local peace economy? And then another thing happened. And I think if we can look at Lebanon as an example of like, it's already, the garbage isn't being picked up. There's already, you know, 50% people, you know, have jobs, already struggling with no food. And then kaboom, 300,000 people are homeless and 200 people die, and like every building is shattered. So when you say all fall apart, things fall apart slowly. In case anybody hasn't noticed, it's falling apart. Kelly lives inside of the falling apart. Some of us live in, you know, neighborhoods that haven't fallen apart yet, but it's falling apart. And, you know, Detroit can teach us, and Oakland can teach us, but this thing doesn't put itself back together. You can't have gone this many years and not invested in the well-being of our communities and think like osmosis, they put themselves back together. No, like Lebanon, we are also in a country that is falling apart. And so what is Lebanon teaching us is let the thing fall apart. And it's civil society, as we saw in the conversation with Sarah, you know, it is people coming together, just like Kelly and I've been teaching. It's like, you've got to come together, you've got to figure it out, we've got to make it happen together. And the creativity that we all have has to be alivened again. The first thing the war economy does is deaden our creativity. It tells us it knows what to do, but it doesn't. It's failing. It's like wars have failed, the system has failed, but we just keep like showing up for it to be better, but it's not going to be. That's how it shows up. So, you know, fall apart, it's fallen apart. So when does, you know, I don't know, you know, they say when is it bottom? It's bottom when you decide it's bottom. Do you know what I mean? Like Kelly, you decided it was bottom a long time ago and showed up to cultivate a local peace economy. I have friends that went to Detroit 10 years ago because they saw the bottom and they've been creating wonderful and beautiful things. But, you know, like pleasure activism came out of some, you know, somebody that was in Oakland and said, the bottom, this is the bottom for me. I can see the system is over. I want to go create beautiful things. So it's really up to each of you to decide, instead of like having myself used by imperialism and the war economy, I want to use myself to cultivate the future. And that's a choice we all have to make. And when we make that, that's our, you know, that's our choice. So, Mary, I'm going to let you introduce Pocky, and I'm going to help Liz get on.
All right. Thank you for that amazing statement, Jody. And thank you, Kelly, for speaking. The work you do is so beautiful and so valuable, and we are lucky to have you. So now Pocky is going to introduce Reverend Liz Theoharis of the Poor People's Campaign to talk a little bit about that.
Great, a great build on the local peace economy. Thanks for helping us segue right into that. I'm always so impressed with what people are doing locally, and certainly that's one of the things that the Poor People's Campaign is doing. We're building the same kind of thing that you are, Kelly, in communities all over the country, and I think it's being proactive that you've done, and that the Poor People's Campaign has done. I mean, it's extraordinary. You know, we look at how we're sitting in this pot that's boiling, and then there are people who emerge out of it, and one of them is Dr. Liz Theoharis, who's about to come on with us. For those of you who don't know, and probably there isn't anybody at this webinar who doesn't know who she is a co-founder and co-director of the Poor People's Campaign, the National Call for Moral Revival. And, you know, what I love about this whole emphasis of the moral revival is that it speaks to, you know, what we're hearing again and again, the struggle for the soul of the nation. And this very language really enables us to move forward. And Dr. Liz Theoharis, are you on? If you could unmute yourself.
She was just on and just fell off. Darn.
This is the thing about sometimes. So here in this new wonderful mode of
This is
connection.
gonna try again, Pocky.
Yeah.
But that was a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You know, this wonderful intersectionality that we're playing with all the time comes to life. Dr. Liz Theoharis, are you back with us? Well, in spirit she is, and she might be, in fact, coming to us even more alive than we think. One of the things that the Poor People's Campaign is engaged in now, for those of you who don't know, and again, I think everybody, both on the panel and listening and viewing this, knows that this amazing thing happened. There was supposed to be this major Poor People's Campaign event on the 20th of June, 2020. And lo and behold, the COVID virus, the pandemic, interfered with that. But instead of people trying to get to the mall in Washington, D.C., they tuned in by the hundreds of thousands and were inspired by people who are engaged in the exact work that Kelly is involved in. And so what we're doing with the Poor People's Campaign, and doing this all over the country, is a project with the acronym MORE. And what we're doing locally is mobilizing, organizing, registering, and educating people to get out the vote. And, you know, for those of us who were not terribly inspired by a lot of the Democratic National Convention, and are certainly, I can't even begin to use the kind of language that that comes to mind when I think about this ongoing Republican National Convention. I want people to engage in this election, both at the top, but primarily down ballot. And that's part of the education that is so important. And Liz, are you here now?
Can you hear me now?
Dr. Yep. Liz Harris.
Oh my goodness.
Welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here. And I was feeling like I didn't even need to get on off of mute, because Pocky, your introduction, and Jody, your conversation about the local peace economies, you all said it all. So, but it is great to be with you all. And thank you for holding this teach-in and this People's Convention. And it's so important that we talk about the real issues, not the lies, not the distractions, not the warmongering, not the violence and policy violence that is going on in other spaces as we speak. And you know, the Poor People's Campaign, as Pocky was saying, you know, has been around for a couple of years now. We're organizing in more than 46 states across the country. And we're looking at the intersection of these interlocking injustices of systemic racism and poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and this false narrative, this narrative that blames poor and marginalized and immigrant and people of color for all of society's problems, pits us against each other, and feeds us this lie of scarcity, that there isn't enough, that we only have money for bombs and war and not for human needs. And so the Poor People's Campaign is organizing in this moment, and indeed we are trying to do more. And that's really about building a movement. That's about not just mobilizing bodies, but moving people's minds, not just getting people out to vote, though that does matter, but having folks sign up to be a part of long-term systemic change, permanently organized communities where we put front and center those that are most impacted by the issues that are impacting actually so many people. You know, in the United States right now, before even this COVID pandemic, before this unending violence, racist violence at the hands of the police, before the kind of economic crash, despite the stock market doing really well, and 55 million people plus, applying for unemployment, 40 million people, facing eviction in the next couple of months. Before all of that, there were 140 million people in this country that were poor and low income. 700 people dying every day in the US from poverty and inequality. And, we really believe that those that are most impacted by these injustices are able to band together with people from all walks of life and build a powerful movement to make the power structures say yes, to transform this society from the bottom up. We have a saying that when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. And we're really working to try to prioritize, these human needs, these grassroots struggles, and see people all across this country building this work up. And so, the issues are before us, right? There's 62 million workers who make less than a living wage. And that was, again, before people were cut off this small amount of unemployment they were getting already. There's not a town or a city or a county anywhere in this country where you can afford a 2-bedroom apartment if you're working full-time at a minimum wage. There are upwards of 12 million homeless people. And then, the numbers are just growing literally every day as eviction moratoriums are running out. And so, these issues don't have to be this way. We don't have to have a society that has the level of racism, the level of poverty, the level of desperation, and the 53 cents of every US dollar that goes to the military, doesn't need to, right? We've proposed, and there's some powerful proposals out there, but that we should cut the military budget at least in half. We'd have a way safer world. We could close down a bunch of these military bases. We could stop lining the pockets of military contractors. We could still take care of our veterans, many of whom are homeless. And so, we have the solutions. They're out there. They're within reach. It's in fact costing our society more to have the levels of poverty and inequality than it would to really turn this war economy into a peace economy, as Jody was talking about, and have really grassroots local solutions to these issues. So, I appreciate being able to talk to y'all a little bit, and look forward to the continued work, really appreciating the leadership that you all are taking in this moment.
Well, Dr. Liz, it's always wonderful to have you on and to converse with you. What I'm curious about is what you see us doing and what you would like to, how this interface of CODEPINK and the Poor People's Campaign, it's really a synergy because we're really encouraging one another, especially on that aspect of demilitarizing. But I think that the whole notion of educating that you all have done such a masterful job with, bringing the affected people, bringing the impacted people before us to really do the educating of people who perhaps didn't know, because we're such a stratified society. And you're doing a wonderful job. And if you'd like to talk a little more about that for a couple of minutes, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so I mean, the goal of the Poor People's Campaign, I think, really does go hand in hand with the work that CODEPINK is doing, and our goals are twofold. It's to shift the narrative, get our nation and our people talking about the real issues that impact us, to also talk about the real solutions, the grassroots solutions, the water affordability programs, the prioritizing, education and healthcare and living wage jobs and strong welfare programs, and demilitarizing our communities and demilitarizing our entire, nation and world. And also the other goal is to build power. To build power amongst the 140 million poor and low income people, to build power amongst a grassroots movement for change, with people from all walks of life, but who have a conscience that we need to, study. Maybe we need to study war a little more, but we need to not have war no more. We need to not have poverty anymore. We have to end racism, and that we can actually save this planet. And so, I mean, I think we're really excited in the Poor People's Campaign to continue our partnership, our strong partnership with CODEPINK. Again, so much of the center of gravity of the work is happening in local communities and states and cities and towns and rural areas. And so, anywhere there are CODEPINK members, anywhere where folks are seeing that we need to come together, there's probably some folks that are also, a part of the Poor People's Campaign, and the more that we can work together, and there are a couple of events that we're doing in the next couple of months as we lead up to the election, trying to get anybody out there to talk about these issues, but then also not just to talk, but to walk the walk, to put forward policy changes that could actually transform things. And so I'm hoping that we continue this beautiful partnership that we all have, and so supportive and appreciative of the work y'all doing.
Yeah, I think there was this wonderful quote. I think someone coined it during the Vietnam War. We have more power than we know. And the Poor People's Campaign has really brought that to life. We do have more power than we know. And thanks to you, thanks to CODEPINK and all the partners, we are bringing that power to life. Thanks, Dr. Liz Theoharis, for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. What a wonderful and exciting project. And we are also so happy to be working with the Poor People's Campaign, and I hope we have a long future together. So now I would like to introduce our very own Leonardo to talk a little bit about Latin America and what we're doing with that.
Great, thanks, Mary. It's always amazing to hear from the Poor People's Campaign, because really they're all about compassion and solidarity and facing up to the harsh realities of life in this country. And that's pretty much the opposite of what we've been seeing at the RNC the last few days, where we're seeing a lot of hate and fear and, just outright lies, and with an emperor who has no clothes. So last week when we did the DNC webinar, I analyzed the foreign policy section of the DNC platform. It was pretty awful. And I was going to do the same thing this week, but the RNC didn't release a platform. Instead, they used the same one as 2016. And that really is not surprising at all, because it's a party, really not just them, but most of the political elite have completely run out of ideas. And so again, Trump is just like he did in 2016. He's running on fear, on hate, and on anti-socialism. And so we saw some of this on Monday night when Mark and Patricia McCluskey, a St. Louis couple who aimed an assault rifle and gun at Black Lives Matter protesters, they got a prime speaking slot after doing that. The very next night, last night in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a man carrying the same exact type of rifle killed 2 protesters and wounded a 3rd. Trump has yet to tweet or say anything about that. CODEPINK joins many others in demanding justice for Jacob Blake and every other victim of racism and state violence. 4 years ago, during the Trump campaign, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua were staples of his stump speech. Last night, we saw Florida's lieutenant governor mention all 3 countries, while also saying that Colombia is a democratic ally of the US, and that democratic ally is a quote. So far this year, Colombia has seen 43 massacres, and its right-wing president and the mainstream media have started calling massacres collective homicides, as if by using a euphemism, they could blunt the rage and the pain felt by the Colombian people. So we see this kind of attack on countries that are supposedly socialist, while countries that have horrible human rights records get called democratic allies just because they follow the US plan. And the Republicans have said that they would have a Venezuelan or Cuban speak every night of the convention to talk about their negative experiences about socialism, or negative experiences with socialism, sorry. Well, I'm from Venezuela, and I want to talk briefly about my experiences with socialism. In the past 9 years in Venezuela, the socialist government has built more than 3.1 million homes for poor and working class people. During the Trump administration alone, Venezuela has built 1.4 million such homes under heavy sanctions. How much public housing has the US government built in the same time period? Before the US sanctions, Venezuela cut extreme poverty and hunger by more than half. It eliminated illiteracy, teaching nearly 1.5 million adults to read. It created 42 new universities, vastly expanded healthcare, and increased voter registration to over 96% of eligible adults. Venezuela went from being one of the most unequal countries in the world to being one of the most equal in the hemisphere. That's my experience with socialism. And now a lot of that progress has been lost as a result of the hybrid war being carried out against Venezuela. Even now, the Trump administration is about to prevent Venezuela from obtaining diesel fuel, which is going to be a huge blow to the country's agriculture, transportation, health, and energy sectors. So they're really trying to strangle the country in the hopes that this will bring about regime change. And of course, Venezuela isn't alone in receiving these sorts of attacks. Nicaragua and Cuba are being targeted as well in Latin America, as are Iran and other countries throughout the world. As for Cuba, Trump put a limit on the amount of remittances that can be sent towards Cuba, impeding Cuban Americans from being able to send money home to their families. He's also gone after Cuba's trade routes, harming its capacity to provide power to its population. He's banned US companies from flying to Cuban cities, and he's also pressured countries to stop accepting Cuban medical aid. I want to go a little bit deeper on this point because it's one of the most vile things I've seen in a long time. The Trump administration and his allies, Senators Marco Rubio, Rick Scott, and Ted Cruz, are engaged in a campaign to smear Cuba's medical brigades as victims of human trafficking. Nothing could be further from the truth. So just to give a bit of background on Cuba's medical internationalism, since 1960, Cuba has been sending doctors abroad to help poor people in need in over 100 countries. They've treated millions of patients. Cuba's medical internationalism is based on solidarity and humanism and the recognition that healthcare is a human right that needs to be provided for everyone. And these brigades of doctors have become one of Cuba's main exports. The countries that can afford to pay Cuba to send them doctors. Other countries that can't afford it reach other agreements and doctors get sent either way. But we have to stress that these doctors are volunteers. They get paid extra to go abroad. Not only that, they're extremely proud to go abroad. They're extremely proud of the work they're doing, providing healthcare to poor people all over the world. Plus, the money the program raises helps fund Cuba's free healthcare and free education system. This is like an incredibly beautiful project, and the Trump administration is trying to wreck it. And to give you an idea of Cuba's solidarity, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Henry Reeve International Medical Brigade. Almost exactly 15 years ago, Hurricane Katrina ravaged New Orleans. The Cuban government, offered to send doctors to help treat victims, but the Bush administration refused. Despite being rejected, the Cubans decided that it would be helpful to have an emergency brigade on hand to respond to global natural disasters and pandemics. That's how the Henry Reeve Brigade was founded. In 15 years, they've treated over 3.5 million people, saving over 80,000 lives. And those statistics are before the pandemic. They've responded to earthquakes in Pakistan, floods in Peru, Ebola in West Africa, cholera in Haiti, and now they're fighting COVID-19 in 50 countries around the world. And so that's why CODEPINK is super proud to be part of the campaign to award the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize to these Cuban medical professionals. And one last little plug, if you're sick of the DNC and sick of the RNC, save the date for some Cuban TLC. On September 26th, exactly 1 month from now, Vijay Prashad and Danny Glover will celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Henry Reeve Brigade by having a conversation with Cuban doctors on the front lines of the pandemics, and we're going to broadcast this webinar live. I promise it's going to nurture your soul. Please register at www.cubanobel.org. Thanks, Mary.
A little TLC sounds like exactly what we all need right now, Leonardo. Thank you for that. And just one comment that I've been thinking with all this is that the pandemic has really emphasized for me how much we all lose by our country's selfish and spiteful foreign policy, because Cuba has done a fantastic job handling the virus. And I understand they're making progress with a vaccine, and we could have shared knowledge with them. We could have worked together and it would have benefited everyone. But sadly, that is not our reality. So thank you so much for joining us, Leonardo, and for that perspective. And to close this out, we have Carly here to talk about divesting from the war machine.
Thank you so much for that, Mary. Appreciate the introduction. Also, thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. And also thank you to Reverend Liz Theoharis and Leonardo for that, I think, really eloquent reminder about the kind of world that we're working to build at CODEPINK. A world which prioritizes human need and not the profits of corporations, right? So I think a lot of us have seen that foreign policy and the fact that we spend $740 billion on the Pentagon every year, while we continue to deny struggling people healthcare, has essentially not been covered at either the Democratic National Convention or the Republican National Convention. And when foreign policy has been mentioned, we heard essentially the same narrative that we always do about warmongering and US exceptionalism that has always been used to secure really the patriotic bona fides of the presidential candidate and to drum up support for each of the presidential candidates' bases, right? And so all of that, I think, can be depressing, right? It's hard to hear that kind of thing, especially if you consider yourself an anti-war activist. But I'd really like us to end the evening on a more hopeful note and talk about a recent victory in the peace movement and what that means for us moving forward. So last week, after 6 months of organizing, thanks to the support of really passionate community members on the ground, the San Luis Obispo City Council voted 5-0 to divest from the war machine. So the city of San Luis Obispo, which is a coastal town in Central California, is now adopting a new socially responsible investment screening policy, one that will essentially exclude industries like weapons manufacturers, fossil fuels, and private prisons. So I think this campaign's success really demonstrates the power of grassroots community organizing, even in the midst of a pandemic, right? So even when physical distancing guidelines were enforced in March of this year in San Luis Obispo, members of the community found creative tactics to continue to build support to divest San Luis Obispo from war and invest responsibly, right? And through this campaign, they were able to gain the support of over 30 community organizations and small businesses, educate the public through social media, and outreach to their local officials about the importance of divesting from war. And I think, this alone is a really great victory for the anti-war movement. Anytime we can divest from the war machine, we should celebrate. But really, I think the fact that community members in San Luis Obispo were able to divest from war, despite what's happening in the presidential election, despite COVID-19, is a great testament that real change takes place when we organize in our local communities, right? I mean, I think we all know, regardless of who wins in November, it's going to take pressure from grassroots activists to take on the war machine in our everyday communities, right? Regardless of who wins in November, the war machine will still very much be present in our everyday lives. So, whether it's our city budgets, our university endowments, philanthropic organizations, religious organizations, our own individual investments, financial asset managers, or our elected officials, really you name it, you name an institution in your city, in your local community. And we're working to stop those people and institutions from investing in companies that supply and prop up the US war machine. Because, we really understand that it is only through a concerted educational campaign to really educate our local communities that we will take away the social license of weapons manufacturers like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, to name just a few, right? We'll take away their social license to make a profit by going to war. So while national politics can, I think, sometimes feel very futile, especially on a night like tonight, I think our work in the streets and in our communities continues and is really more vital than ever. So I'd really invite everyone here who is angry and upset about the spectacle that is the RNC and the DNC to join us and start taking on the war machine in your local communities. So I'm going to have Mary drop a link in the chat box where you can sign up to join or start a campaign in your own city, whether it's going after city council, your university endowment, or the other institutions that I mentioned. Once you sign up, a CODEPINK organizer will be in touch with you to walk you through the next steps, and walk you all through all of our resources and knowledge that we can share with you to really divest from war in our local communities. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mary. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Carly. I think that everything we do here at CODEPINK is important, but I really feel that the divestment campaign is one of our core projects. It is so central to everything we do, and we are so lucky to have you working on it. So if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the question and answer section of the meeting. And if any of our panelists have any final thoughts, I invite them to share them now. And if not, we can go ahead and wrap up, and you can go watch the RNC, or you can choose to not watch it and instead spend your time and energy on something peaceful and cheerful and hopeful. And finally, I will also share in the chat a link to a Google form where you can sign up to get involved with any CODEPINK campaigns, any of the ones mentioned here tonight that interest you, or any of our many other projects. So thank you so much to all of our fantastic speakers, and thank you to everyone who joined us tonight and listened to our conversation. I hope you found it insightful or inspiring, or it made you think, and I hope to see you again sometime.